The day knowledge screamed the fall of Baghdad, 1258 AD. In the year 1258, the world lost something it did not know it possessed. No bells rang, no skies burned, no prophecy was fulfilled. Baghdad began to die the way civilizations always do, quietly, while people were still arguing about comfort. Baghdad had existed too long to imagine an ending. It had survived enemies that no longer had names. It had absorbed crises and turned them into footnotes. Every generation believed collapse was a story that belonged to the past. That belief was the city's greatest weakness. Baghdad was not important because it was rich. It was important because it remembered. When others forgot, Baghdad archived. When others burned, Baghdad copied. When others silenced thinkers, Baghdad gathered them. Ideas traveled farther than armies. Knowledge outlived kings, memory outpaced power, and that made Baghdad arrogant. The city believed intelligence was armor. It believed contribution created immunity. It believed history respected usefulness. History respects nothing. Beyond Baghdad's walls, the world had changed shape. Power no longer argued. It no longer negotiated identity. It no longer cared about legacy. Power moved fast. Power erased obstacles. Power did not ask permission. Entire cities vanished between seasons. Populations disappeared between reports. Maps were redrawn not with ink, but with absence. Baghdad heard the rumors. Baghdad debated them. Baghdad dismissed them. It believed those cities were crude, unorganized, uncivilized. Baghdad believed refinement protected it from brutality. It believed wrong. Inside palaces and halls, leaders spoke the language of delay. Every decision was postponed in the name of balance. Every threat was softened in the name of diplomacy. They believed caution was wisdom. They believed hesitation was intelligence. They believed time belonged to them. Time never does. Letters were written, formal, polite, dense with centuries of cultural confidence. They were sent to men who measured value in submission. The replies were brief. They did not argue. They did not explain. They moved. The Mongol army did not announce itself. It approached like a consequence, unavoidable, unstoppable. There was no dramatic arrival, no final warning, just pressure tightening around the city's throat. Baghdad had never faced an enemy that did not respect boundaries. This enemy respected results. The siege was not theatrical. It was mechanical. Engineers replaced heroes. Calculations replaced courage, logistics replaced prayer. The land itself was turned against the city, rivers redirected, ground reshaped, time weaponized. Baghdad waited for a miracle. Miracles do not visit cities that refuse to adapt. Defenders fought without belief. Belief had already left. When the walls finally failed, there was no shock, only confirmation. The Mongols did not enter to conquer. They entered to finish. There was no distinction between soldier and civilian, no separation between scholar and laborer, no value in exception. Life was processed, not judged. The killing did not burn hot. It stayed cold. Efficiency replaced emotion. Speed replaced cruelty. Streets filled with absence faster than blood. Families disappeared mid-sentence. Teachers fell beside students. Physicians died holding knowledge that would never be used again. The city did not scream. It suffocated. Libraries were emptied without ceremony. Books were not examined. They were discarded. Manuscripts copied by hand across centuries were reduced to weight, thrown into the river like waste. Ink bled into water. Equations dissolved. Histories unraveled. The river accepted everything, without resistance, without memory. Those who survived believed the worst had passed. They were wrong. The violence did not stop. It refined. The caliph believed position created exception. It did not. He was removed without spectacle, without symbolism, without delay. The idea of divine permanence collapsed with him. What followed was not chaos. It was silence. No debates, no lessons, no arguments echoing through courtyards. The engine stopped. Baghdad still stood as a city, but it no longer functioned as a mind. The loss was not immediate. That made it invisible. Humanity did not feel the wound until centuries later, when progress slowed, when errors multiplied, when rediscovery replaced advancement. The world did not enter darkness overnight. It drifted. Baghdad became a ghost no one listened to. Because listening would require admitting a truth no civilization enjoys, that intelligence without vigilance is temporary. Baghdad proved that knowledge unprotected is knowledge already lost. After the killing slowed, something worse replaced it. Understanding. Those who remained alive began to comprehend what had actually been destroyed. Not their homes, not their markets, not even their families. Continuity. Baghdad had functioned like a relay. One generation handed understanding to the next without interruption. That chain had been snapped with precision. The Mongols did not need to stay. The damage no longer required supervision. Knowledge dies fastest when no one is left who knows what to ask next. Survivors searched for teachers. There were none. They searched for texts. They were unreadable fragments pulled from water. They searched for order. There was no system left to remember it. Baghdad had not been conquered. It had been unplugged. The streets became familiar, but hollow. Buildings stood like shells emptied of purpose. Mosques still existed, but voices no longer debated within them. Libraries still stood, but nothing inside them pointed forward. The city had memory loss, and memory loss is fatal to civilizations. Outside Baghdad, rulers watched and calculated the wrong lesson. They focused on numbers, on death counts, on brutality. They missed the real weapon. The Mongols had discovered that destroying thinkers is more effective than defeating armies, that removing continuity collapses resistance permanently, that fear fades but ignorance compounds. Baghdad was proof. Centuries of accumulated correction vanished. Errors that had been fixed returned. Diseases once understood became mysteries again. Stars once mapped slipped back into speculation. Humanity did not collapse. It stalled. Progress became rediscovery. Advancement became repetition. Knowledge became rumor. Baghdad's absence became normal. The world adapted to less. It did not realize it was missing more. Those who fled carried fragments, partial memories, incomplete formulas, ideas without foundations. Without Baghdad, there was no center to verify. No place where disciplines collided and corrected each other. Ideas drifted unchecked. Mistakes lived longer. Truth became regional. Civilization fractured quietly. Generations later, historians would search for causes. They would blame culture, religion, politics. They would argue endlessly. They would miss the obvious. Baghdad fell because it believed itself essential, because it assumed preservation was automatic, because it mistook admiration for protection. Every great center repeats this mistake. Baghdad was simply early. The Mongols did not hate knowledge. They understood power better. They knew memory creates resistance. They knew continuity creates identity. They knew erasing both leaves obedience behind. Baghdad obeyed by disappearing. What survived were ruins and legends, stories told without understanding, names repeated without context. The city became myth faster than warning. People spoke of Baghdad the way they speak of Atlantis, as something impressive, distant, irrelevant. That was the final victory. Because once loss becomes abstract, repetition becomes inevitable. Civilizations prefer comfort over vigilance. They prefer belief over preparation. They prefer legacy over defense. Baghdad embodied all three and paid for each. The world moved forward slower, not because it lacked intelligence, but because it lacked accumulated correction. Progress is fragile. It exists only while protected. Baghdad proved that forgetting is easier than preserving, and far more permanent. What remained was not emptiness. It was delay, centuries of delay, a wound that never visibly bled, but never healed. Baghdad was gone, but its absence shaped everything that followed. Absence has weight. It presses on everything that follows. After Baghdad, the world did not collapse. That would have been obvious. Instead, it narrowed. Knowledge no longer expanded outward from a center. It scattered, disconnected, unverified. Ideas survived, but they stopped talking to each other. Before Baghdad, disciplines collided. Astronomy corrected navigation. Mathematics refined medicine. Philosophy challenged theology. Error was hunted down because comparison was constant. After Baghdad, comparison weakened. Civilizations began working in isolation. Mistakes lived longer. Superstition returned quietly, wearing the mask of certainty. People did not notice regression. They rarely do. Regression feels like stability at first. Baghdad had been a filter. Without it, everything passed unchecked. The Mongols had not destroyed a city. They had removed quality control. That was the real loss. Survivors who escaped carried pieces of brilliance with them. But brilliance without context decays. A formula without its proof becomes a rumor. A method without its correction becomes dogma. A text without its counterargument becomes ideology. Baghdad had prevented that, by being crowded, by being loud, by being contradictory. After its fall, certainty became easier, and certainty is dangerous. The world learned to live with less accuracy, less skepticism, less refinement. Comfort replaced rigor. Centuries later, when progress resumed elsewhere, it did so slowly. painfully. By rediscovering what had already been known, humanity paid twice for the same lessons, once in blood, once in time. Baghdad had been expensive to lose, but its cost was delayed, and delayed costs are always underestimated. Empires rose believing they were different. They studied Rome, they studied Persia, they studied enemies. They did not study Baghdad, because Baghdad did not fall to decadence alone. It fell to assumption, the assumption that importance ensures survival, that usefulness creates allies, that being needed guarantees protection. None of that is true. Power protects only what it fears, and knowledge is rarely feared until it is gone. The Mongols understood this instinctively. They removed fear by removing memory. In the absence of Baghdad, rulers learned the wrong lesson. They fortified walls. They expanded armies. They stockpiled weapons. They did not fortify libraries. They did not protect teachers. They did not ensure continuity. They confused defense with preservation. Centuries passed. Baghdad became a reference point, a tragedy, a cautionary tale. But cautionary tales only work when they are remembered as warnings. Baghdad was remembered as history. History feels finished. Warnings feel unfinished. That distinction mattered. The world entered an era where destruction was faster than understanding, where erasure was easier than construction, where power learned that eliminating thinkers simplifies control. Baghdad was the blueprint, not intentionally, but effectively. When future regimes silenced scholars, burned texts, rewrote facts, they were repeating the same act, with different justifications, with different languages, with the same outcome: delay. Human progress slowed, not because humanity became less capable, but because it became less connected to its own corrections. Baghdad had been connective tissue. Once severed, movement continued, but coordination was lost. Limbs still moved, the body no longer knew why. This is why Baghdad still matters. Not because it was Islamic, not because it was Arab, not because it was ancient, but because it demonstrated a universal law. Civilizations do not die when they are attacked. They die when their ability to self-correct is removed. Baghdad scholars had argued constantly. They disagreed violently in words. They challenged relentlessly. That friction was strength. After Baghdad, silence replaced friction. And silence feels peaceful until stagnation sets in. The world learned to mistake quiet for order, consensus for truth, repetition for progress. Baghdad had prevented those illusions. Its destruction made them normal. This was the inheritance, not ruins, not myths, but lowered standards, and lowered standards are contagious. Once accepted, they spread quietly, across borders, across cultures, across centuries. By the time anyone notices, recovery feels impossible. Baghdad was not unique in its fall, but it was unique in what it removed: a center, a conscience, a corrective force. Without it, humanity continued, but limping, always slightly behind where it could have been, always paying interest on a debt it forgot it owed. Baghdad did not end the world, it delayed it, and delay over centuries becomes destiny. Delay is invisible while it happens. That is why it is so lethal. After Baghdad, no alarm sounded. No council gathered to mourn what was truly lost. No global reckoning followed. Life adjusted, and adjustment is how damage hides. Civilizations adapted to operating without a center. They accepted fragmentation as normal. They treated inconsistency as diversity. They mistook survival for success. The absence of Baghdad did not scream. It whispered through centuries. Universities formed elsewhere, but without inheritance. Libraries grew, but without lineage. Thinkers emerged, but without a common form to collide, correct, and refine. Knowledge continued. Wisdom thinned. The difference mattered. Without Baghdad, errors persisted longer. Bad ideas enjoyed extended lifespans. Dogma learned to wear reason's clothing. Power noticed. Rulers learned that controlling information was easier than debating it. That erasing sources simplified obedience. That fear worked faster when memory was short. The pattern repeated. Books burned. Teachers silenced. Languages simplified. Histories rewritten. Each time, leaders believed they were unique. They were not. They were echoing Baghdad, but echoes grow quieter with distance, and the warning lost urgency. Generations passed. Technology improved. Weapons advanced. Communication accelerated. People assumed progress had resumed. They did not realize how much had been lost permanently. Humanity did not regain what Baghdad had held. It rebuilt substitutes, approximations, workarounds. The original synthesis was gone. What once took decades to refine now took centuries to rediscover. What once required debate now required disaster. The cost was measured not in deaths but in missed futures. Baghdad represented a moment when discipline spoke fluently to each other, when disagreement produced clarity instead of division, when memory was collective rather than isolated. That model vanished. The world accepted specialization without synthesis, expertise without dialogue, certainty without challenge. Efficiency increased. Understanding did not. This imbalance grew. It shaped politics. It shaped science. It shaped culture. The modern world inherited acceleration without depth, speed without correction, volume without verification. Baghdad had prevented that by forcing ideas to survive contact with other ideas. Without it, ideas learned to survive unchallenged. That is why collapse now arrives faster. That is why misinformation spreads easier. That is why confidence outpaces competence. These are not modern failures. They are delayed consequences. Baghdad was not responsible. It was removed, and removal leaves cavities that fill with anything available. The city did not fall because it lacked strength. It fell because it misunderstood protection. It believed being valuable made it safe. It believed being admired made it untouchable. It believed being necessary made it permanent. Those beliefs remain common. Every major institution carries them. Every cultural center repeats them. Every intellectual capital assumes exemption. History has not changed its rules. It removes continuity when vigilance fades. It tests assumptions with force. It punishes arrogance quietly, then completely. Baghdad was an early lesson. Ignored because it was inconvenient. Dismissed because it belonged to the past, reframed because it implicated everyone. Civilizations prefer stories where collapse feels deserved. Baghdad was uncomfortable, it was competent, it was productive, it was useful, and it still fell. That truth remains difficult, because it means survival is not earned by contribution alone. It must be defended deliberately, continuously, without pause. Knowledge does not defend itself, memory does not preserve itself, progress does not protect its creators. Baghdad proved that. Its destruction was not a tragedy, it was a demonstration that brilliance without defense is temporary, that centers without protection are liabilities, that continuity is more fragile than power. The world continues to repeat the experiment. With different cities, different languages, different technologies, the result remains consistent. When continuity breaks, humanity slows. When memory fractures, errors multiply. When correction disappears, collapse accelerates. Baghdad was not the end. It was a warning delivered too early. By the time the world understood it, the cost had already compounded beyond calculation. This is why Baghdad still matters, not as nostalgia, not as loss, but as instruction. And instruction, humanity continues to misunderstand, because it is easier to rebuild walls than to protect ideas, and walls have never saved civilizations. Only continuity has. Baghdad held it, then lost it, and the world has been paying for that loss ever since.